Welcome to St. Lucy's Guide. I appreciate you taking the time to participate with our project as we examine the Bible and help to create an apologetic for those of us with disabilities. As we examine the Bible, in particular the Old Testament, it is necessary to come to an understanding of the timeline about when the books of the Torah, the Old Testament, were written to give us a better sense of the social, political, and even legal and medical knowledge that was available at that particular time. To do so, it is necessary to examine what was known at that particular time and get a frame of reference. And one of the best places to start with that is an examination of the Egyptian timeline. Why? Because within this period, when these books were being written, including the Pentateuch, Egypt was a factor that was always there in the life of Israel, of the area of Canaan. It was one of those particular political, social, military powers that was always there. Egypt, again, was one of the longest lasting, in fact, is the longest lasting civilizations that we know of. It's been with us for 3,000 years, from 3,000 BC to 30 AD, and it was always right next to Canaan. It was always a factor and an influence. When we look at the region, as you can tell from the map, to the west of Canaan is the Mediterranean Sea, and it had a rocky coastline, and so threats from the sea simply didn't exist. It was too hard to land. To the north was Syria and Phoenicia, but again, they were never really a military power and were quite further away. So it really wasn't an influence or a barrier or on them. Further was Turkey or Hittites, and again, it was really not a threat because of its distance away. To the east was the Arabian Desert, and as a result of that, no one could live there, so invasion from that direction wouldn't be possible. So Egypt was to the south and to the west. It was always a large influence, and it was again always there within their background and right next to the back door. For the context of the Bible, if we can get a framework of the time period of what was going on, this neighbor gives us that opportunity. Again, it's the longest lasting civilization, and again, going back to the first pharaoh in approximately 3000 BC, who was able then to unite all of Egypt. And it extends again until the time of Cleopatra in 30 AD. And at that time, Rome was the other major power within the region, and it was absorbed by them. But the history of the Egyptian people goes through approximately 30 dynasties, and we know that this is rather accurate because it was written down by Manetho. He was a priest scholar of Egypt who was able to record all of the dynasties and all of the pharaohs. This record was then preserved by the Jewish priest Josephus, who then was able to save this scholarly work for us. And then it was further saved by Herodotus, who was a Greek uh, scholar and is said to be the father of history. One of the reasons that we can call him the father of history is simply because he had no reason to be biased within the historical recordings of any of this. So he is considered to be that. And it was him who came up with the notion of that caused Egypt the gift of the Nile. Why? Because of the influence that the Nile River had on the civilization as well as on the area. The Nile River had a large floodplain that would flood each spring. And even though that there was not much rainfall within the particular region, simply by having this floodplain happen, the flood happened in each of the springs that allowed crops to grow. And so we have this opportunity for civilization to grow and develop because the people were able to eat. Um, and crops would grow as a result of this, and that even in the time of back in the time of Abraham, everyone knows that you can go to the Nile region in the times when your area was having famine, or you simply couldn't be able to grow food. It became known as the breadbasket of the Middle East because this is where we can go to survive. The topography of Egypt is really divided into two areas, one being um, two areas, one being Upper Egypt and the other is Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt, even though it's counterintuitive, is to the south, and that has to do with the elevation area. The Nile River is going to start in Africa and head north. And because of the elevation of the Egyptian area, the south has a higher elevation, and the Nile River will head north to the lower. So the lower is in the north. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to us, but that's simply the reality of it. And there we go. As a result, the pharaohs would actually have um, uh, the land was again ruled by the pharaohs. The pharaohs, by meaning of that, means the pharaoh means of a great house. Means by which he was to convey and rule over the area. And at the same time, the thought process was that it also meant over the divine. The pharaohs had to control the entire universe. They were responsible for the ma'at, the natural order of things, and this could include the controlling of the flooding of the Nile, the sun rising. Everything that was to be done was laid upon the pharaoh, and the pharaohs took on that possibility, and there we have it. And this is why, in certain occasions, that we have the interaction with the Canaanites. So the pharaohs was supposed to go out there every morning and make sure the sun rose as it was supposed to. And this is why during the time of Moses, that is why God said to Moses that he would make I will make you like a god to Pharaoh. In other words, since the Pharaoh was said to be a god, God was going to also raise Moses up and to challenge the divinity of the Pharaoh. And that the Pharaoh and the people would begin to recognize that um, that there was another God and not their polytheistic form of religion that was able to disrupt their nature of things. And what you'll notice, of course, too, is that the plagues of the story of Exodus were always challenging the various gods that existed at that particular time. And you'll notice too that as you're reading through the books of Exodus, that's why Moses always challenged the Pharaoh during the early morning, because he was disrupting the Pharaoh's duties of raising the sun again. The time again with the timeline. Again, there were different times throughout this 3,000 period. There were various kingdoms, and there were intermediate eras. And what do we mean by that? With the kingdoms, we mean that there was one ruler who ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt. During the intermediate times, that there were two rulers. We have three kingdoms in total: an old, a middle, and a new. And again, with the intermediate. And what you'll notice is that to identify what period of time, that can be shown simply by what the pharaohs wore. You'll notice that the pharaohs during the kingdom time, there was a red crown for Lower Egypt and a white crown for Upper Egypt. And at the intermediate times, there would be two pharaohs, one wearing each of the crowns. And during the kingdom times, they would be combined. And when you see an image of a pharaoh wearing both the red and the white, that means that that particular dynasty was reflecting a pharaoh who ruled over both. Also interesting was that the pharaoh not only wore the two crowns, but was also depicted as holding two things. One, a crook, in other words, a shepherd's staff, to protect his people. And in the other hand would be a scepter to rule the people, a rod to keep them under control. And we also notice that within the Old Testament as well, that Moses also carried a staff. Only one of the differences was that Moses was able to use his staff to perform various types of miracles, like parting of the water, bringing water forth from the rock. So we have that sort of similarities within that. And there was reaction after that. Many of the gods that existed or depicted as the pharaohs were various types of animals. One that was the goddess Nut. Was not depicted as an animal, but rather as a dome that was covered over the space of Egypt, creating the sky. The founder of Egypt back in 3000 AD was Numar. And what we find is that in approximately 3000 BC was the Numar Palette that was discovered. And it was discovered in 1897 by the British. And it gives us the first archaeological proof of the time period when this happens. And then Numar creates the first dynasty. In the second dynasty, we find the use of the what we normally think of as the elaborate burials in the uses of the pyramids, and this will continue on to approximately 2500 BC, and the first of these in the second dynasty, we start off with the mastabas, or the buildings were clay bricks There were single-story buildings, and they had elaborate chambers that were built underneath these particular buildings. And then during the third dynasty, we find that someone had the great idea of what we'll do is we'll take these mastabas and we would begin to stack them. Of course, we find that by stacking them, they were made out of clay. It didn't quite work out that well. So the whole thing, now we need to go to back to using stone pyramids. And then we have the stone pyramids in the fourth dynasty, and again, way before the time of Abraham, to about 2500 BC. And then you have a great period of time when there was not much being done. And I say way before the time of Abraham because of the fact that some archaeological evidence suggests that Abraham was born approximately in 1951 BC, and we have the dynasties of approximately the 12th dynasty at that particular time. They tried to pyramids out of clay again during this period, and it did not last or work very well. And again, there were mud fortifications that were used in the south of Egypt. So the point is that there were plenty of times during the time periods for Egypt that were there. It was always there. The influence was there. They were the strongest neighbor. If we can find times when the Canaanites did interact with the Egyptians, we find that throughout the Old Testament. And there may have been, it gives us an idea of approximately what time period we're talking about for the various books of the Old Testament. Now, it is true that there can be a bit debatable as to the reckoning of the times. And some of the observations come in when we decide when a particular person was dealing with a particular pharaoh and how do we make that work. And that becomes the discussion. And if there is a debate over it, it can shift. And some historians or archaeologists, or more specifically, Old Testament scholars, in their viewpoint of when certain things happened, did, for example, Moses deal with one particular pharaoh, or was it a number of pharaohs? It will shift the time period, but it still gives us a frame of reference, and that's something that we have to reconcile for ourselves as to which particular one we're going to use. And that has to be a decision. So when you come across literature that puts the debate on different footing, just realize the time periods can shift by as much as 200 years. The other thing to bear in mind as we try to do a fitting in or a reckoning as to the Old Testament and the timeline for the Egyptian civilizations is that it shift from approximately 200 years, but also in terms of the genealogy. You have to make sure that you are having a better understanding or a full understanding of the term lifespan, was approximately 30 years versus a generation. And a generation, by most archaeological reckoning, was about 23 years. So we have to bear that in mind when you're trying to reconcile when which particular timeline for the Old Testament that you'd want to agree to. Well, I appreciate this and I thank you. And I hope that you would join us for our weekly discussions as well as for our next video. Thank you.